Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hope that you all are doing well. Thank you for attending our webinar on vibe coding beyond the hype. Um, Today, I'm going to be your moderator. I'm Murray Ray, been with Catalyte for about 10 years. And joining us will be Chris Sorel, head of AI and innovation, and Jeff Schmidt, a senior architect here and a developer of several AI applications that we've built. Before we begin, just want to take a quick poll. If you could just use your little icons, how many people really understand what vibe coding is and have vibed away in front of your machine? A couple of lonely hearts.
That's good.
Oh, there we go. People are owning up to it. Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and we obviously have a little bit of our own take on vibe coding and kind of some of the things we're doing here at Catalyte. So we can go ahead and get started. Um, Chris, would you like to take it away for us?
Yeah, I think so. I think we may have some stragglers kind of trailing in, but we can get started. So we wanted to talk about vibe coding because I think it's a bit of a buzzword and it sounds kind of odd, right? Whatever, we're just coding by feeling, and so we thought it would be good to maybe disambiguate a little bit, and also to just give a little bit of sort of a broader context about how we can use AI as a development tool and how we can use it to really accelerate our projects and our initiatives. Um, so we'll start with just kind of a basic, question, and as what is vibe coding? And um, so just to sort of paraphrase here, vibe coding is a creative, intuitive approach to programming, and it's emphasizing flow and aesthetic coherence and developer experience versus strict adherence to formal methodology. So you're not going to find, agile ceremonies in vibe coding. You're not necessarily going to find detailed user stories or requirements in the way that you might think of them traditionally. And so this kind of evolved out of, frankly, people who didn't necessarily have pro dev experience and kind of came into suddenly AI is letting me do some coding and be a much, frankly, better developer than I'd be without it. And so sort of, I think, absent of all of the process and policy and procedures that we've built into software development, they're able to very quickly develop things, and they're less concerned necessarily about formal structure and patterns as they are about, does it work, does it fit my intention, does it work with how I want it to work for the users. And so that's kind of what it came out of, is people going, wow, look what I just built in 2 days. And so of course businesses started to look at that and go, well, can we build things in 2 days as well? And I think that kind of the preview of that is yes and no. Um, so just some characteristics of what we might consider to be vibe coding. Human-centered syntax, a very flow-first development, meaning trying to get into that flow space, avoiding things that take you out of that, avoiding interruptions and task switching, and really sort of supporting cognitive and emotional immersion. Aesthetic alignment, meaning, and this is where it gets a little, uh, I don't know how much you need your code to resonate emotionally so much as work, but there is a certain amount of aesthetics to code, and it can be enjoyable or it can be a slog, and so the idea here is to align it aesthetically with the way that you think and with the way that you feel and experience, and make code fun again, frankly. And so I think the other piece that I think is really important is intuitional development. So as pro devs, we've kind of gotten into a place of very structured patterns and very clear rules and processes and ceremonies, and a lot of that sort of prevents you from getting into like a really intuitional space with your development. And that's something that vibe coding brings back, is like, I feel like it would be better to do it this way. Let me play with that. Let me see what happens, and let me, of course, because we're using AI, we can do that stuff quickly and be more sort of playfully explorative with our code, because we can do that quickly and then say, back out of it and say, okay, that didn't really work. And then of course, minimal ceremony. So we're avoiding over engineering and just limiting our use of frameworks to what's pragmatic and improves momentum. So with that said, Jeff, any points you want to add to that?
When I was learning programming, can you hear me? Yeah. When I was learning programming, I was in a computer lab with some fellow students, and we were coding up, I think, a tic-tac-toe game. And I finally, my stomach, after I kind of fell into this flow state, and my stomach finally snapped me out of it at some point in the middle of the afternoon. And I looked around to my friends and asked about, lunch, where we were going, what we were going to do, and not knowing the time. And they chuckled and said, "Yeah, Jeff, we were asking you, you weren't responding. This is not because it had earbuds rather, or headphones, but rather I was in this flow state. I had no idea that my friends went to lunch." And that to me has always been kind of a milestone state that I try to find myself back in, because it's really a fun place to be. And to me, it really resonates as kind of a poster child example for being a representative of what this flow state is really about, for me personally anyway. And everything else, the ceremonies, when you're learning something new, the act of coding itself, documentation, and so on and so forth, are all kind of barriers to entry, is the way I look at it. And reducing those barriers to entry is kind of the name of the game. And now that we have some tooling available to us that allows for the code to be generated, that helps me using tools like that helps me quickly to get back into that flow or vibe oriented state.
Yeah. And I will say,
to me, that's a lot of representative of a lot of the characteristics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say, I don't think that vibe coding is a replacement for traditional coding. I think it's sort of a new tool set, and so I think of it as very prototype or prototypical. It's about developing things quickly, moving fast, and breaking things, and saying, hey, I'm just going to put a spike in the ground and see what I can build that's a new UI, right? Maybe I'm not happy with the UI we have in an application, but the API is good. Well, let's just vibe code a new UI in React instead of Angular or something like that, and see, what it looks like. Or let's just try to break this pattern that feels clunky and try a new thing. And so that piece of it becomes really, it allows you to get back to that intuitive state of how these things fit together. And so I think that that's the first place I think of vibe coding is useful in industry, is let's use it to explore new things, try new technologies, try new patterns, and user experiences and things like that very quickly. And then if it works, if it looks good, then we can look at how can we bring that into our production environments, into our production workflows. And I think that's a good sort of segue into a distinction that we're making. And so versus vibe coding, we have maybe this idea of structured AI development, which is to say, very similar to the way that we do structured project development today, just leveraging AI tools in ways that allow us to be much more efficient. And this is something that we at Catalyte are leaning very heavily into, is using these tools. And so kind of jumping down the list a little bit, I always use the example of a paint sprayer is much faster than rolling or brushing paint onto, a wall. And it's not inherently better or worse, it's just faster. But it also requires a discipline around how to spray paint effectively. And so very similarly, if we want to use AI to expedite and make our coding better and faster, then we have to develop that discipline. And so I think of this as very team oriented. It prioritizes standard patterns and technologies. But it does allow true full stack feature development. And this is different because we've sort of moved away in traditional coding from full stack into, okay, we've got a database person and this person's the UI resource, and this one's doing the integration layer and things like that. But because AI allows us to be more capable at technologies that we don't have depth in, we really can do full stack feature development. And so that becomes a more interesting way of setting up a team, is as sort of a group of sort of generalist operators that are broadly capable and are supplementing where they may not have deep experience by using AI capabilities to help them. And I think that that's going to be really revolutionary for allowing teams to be much more flexible and efficient, and getting rid of blockers where it might have been, well, I'm waiting on the API to be done, so I can't move forward. Well, now I can do that. But it is specification heavy. And I think that's important, right? Because as I have painfully learned, when you're using AI code gen, you have to be very, very specific. You have to be very clear, and you have to be detailed. And so you'll see there are some tools that are out there now that actually put that really forward. So Kiro, for example, which is still in a closed beta, but that's a spec-driven development. And so it forces you into this process of developing requirements and a spec and a task list before you execute. And I think that becomes really important, because what happens otherwise is that AI runs amok, and you end up spending a ton of time trying to back out of things that it did that you didn't want it to do. So this is a somewhat less iterative and exploratory than vibe coding, but it's certainly more so than trad coding, because we can go quicker, we can try things out, prototype them quickly, and say, okay, that did or didn't work. And we have identified places where it's really good. So developing boilerplate documentation, test suites, obviously, but then I think about first draft code, right? And that's kind of like first draft writing, and I treat it very similarly. Let's build out first draft code. This is it's the framework of the classes and the methods that I need, and it works maybe, but then I'm going to go in and look at it and go, okay, is this efficient? Is this the best approach? Is it aligned with our patterns and practices? And so we do that first draft coding using AI, and then we might, sort of manually refine as needed. And that's just, lastly, I think this is a pro dev story. And it's the difference between a amateur dev is going to be more leaning towards the vibe coding side, whereas a pro dev bringing extensive traditional coding experience is going to want to lean towards this more structured AI development process. And it is more process heavy, but again, faster than trad coding. And I'm trying to coin that term, trad coding, as just kind of like trad climbing, something that is the old school, but is still good. Jeff, anything you want to add there?
I like the paint sprayer analogy. And I think about the level of effort needed to paint a room with a brush versus a sprayer. And the downstream repercussion of that is significant in terms of change. If you have a paint brush and you're painting your room and the shade doesn't turn out right, or you just change your mind altogether with it and you want to go in a different direction with an entirely different color palette, you're going to be far less likely to do so if you've used a paintbrush as opposed to a sprayer, because that sprayer is so much faster. The exploratory capabilities offered by the tooling that we're going to look at today is significant, to say the least, and it removes the investment that developers create as a byproduct of actually coding solutions. To do all of that is well and good, but to do that with structure, especially within large or smaller large teams, is more significant still. So I think it's very important.
agree. Okay, well, I think that's a good segue. Let's just get into some demo and see how we can use this.
Okay, so I'm going to
All
share
right,
my
and while
screen
Jeff is
here.
getting set up, there is a Q&A capability. If you do have questions as we go along, please feel free to type them. If something catches your eye, just go ahead and throw up a little exclamation point or something, and we can stop and answer right away if it's something that's important. Otherwise, we'll try to get to those questions as they come along.
Can everyone see my U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development?
Yes.
Great. Okay, awesome. A bit of a, I'll ask for forgiveness now. I'm recovering from a cold, so if I wind up coughing, I apologize for that. Or grunting, whatever. So the demo that we're going to look at here is going to be kind of a, for lack of a better description, a PDF inspired web form. And what I mean is the Department of Housing and Urban Development has thousands, hundreds, maybe thousands of these forms that it uses to enable individuals, landlords, lenders, and so forth to apply for and report on, or even manage housing programs and funding. And so if we take a look at one of these forms, it's just a PDF, it's a fillable PDF. And what we're going to do here is, instead of relying on PDF capabilities, we're going to go generate some web forms or a web form that will do the same thing. Now, it's not going to be, high fidelity, everything ticked and tied at the end, but rather more of a summary level or superficial level to demonstrate what's capable without writing a line of code. And this is significant. We're going to do this in Python, a language which I've never written a line for in my life. So I'm going to be exploring a technology. I'm capable of exploring a technology because AI is going to write the code for me, which is pretty intriguing. The tooling that we're going to use is Cursor. Now, if this is new to you, the name, it'll look familiar, I'm sure. This is VS Code. It's literally a fork of Visual Studio Code that has been AI-ified. And you can see that, so to speak, in this chat pane here to the right. So this is a little bit of tutorial or explanation up front so that we're on the same page. And this is just like most chat experiences. We're able to, provide instructions here via this chat pane, and Cursor behind the scenes is going to go ahead and write the code, create a project, create a solution for us. And so we'll get started here by giving it an initial instruction to create a basic Streamlit app for collecting information needed to complete HUD forms. We'll follow that by asking it to include a navigation bar and a sticky footer, as well as then provide the limiting instruction of, we're only going to start with one page. So we're going to start off real simple, kind of hello world, and ask it to also include some descriptive text. So as I kick that off, some more background information. So as we do this, Cursor is going to be performing some tasks for us. Those tasks take time. So as that occurs, I'm going to go ahead and kind of explain some of the backstory of what's going on here. First and foremost is this notion of a to-do list. What Cursor is doing is taking this initial set of instructions for a basic kind of hello world web form or web app, and breaks it down into more concrete steps. And so you can see that it's going to execute those steps and provide updates back to me to let me know where it is in the process. So, all right, it's done. We have a web form, and it then goes into a summary here of what it's done. It's created a few files, which you can now see over here. The Python file itself, which will provide the code of requirements.txt. The requirements.txt file is specifying dependencies that are necessary for this to run, namely the Streamlit dependency, and it's going out of its way to provide a little bit of documentation, a little README file in Markdown that provides instructions on how to run the software. A summary of key features, and then some instruction on executing this. So let's see if this will, and then lastly, rather, a summary. It's been provided for describing a hero section, and the information about HUD forms has been generated. And so let's take a look at what it's done here. Not bad. We have a navigation bar that I asked for. It's gone and generated some descriptive copy here. It's also first issue. We're not rendering this. We're not rendering the HTML. We're getting some raw HTML, but we also have. So we'll fix that here in a second. And we also have some our sticky footer. So let's tell it. Let's go back here and tell it that pages should not render raw HTML, and try and get that fixed. So it creates a few to-dos, and it's going to go ahead and proceed with that. While it's doing that, let's talk about a little bit about the some of the other features here, other capabilities that you're seeing. I don't want to get started into something if this is going to go resolve quickly. It's AI, so it's always a bit variable. And if it's going to camp on a task for a little bit, then let's go ahead and talk about the chat pane, the chat window itself. You can see down here that so we're able to specify the model that we're using. And right now, so by default, you can specify that an auto mode is used. I've turned this off so that there's somewhat more consistency. By auto, it means it's going to go toggle between automatically between different models that are available. I've turned that off. I'm using Sonnet 4, Claude Sonnet 4, again, for some consistency. And okay, so back to the code. It seems like now we've got this squared away. Let's see if it's actually done this.
To call out, you might notice in that window there's a percentage sign there, and that is important because it's actually telling you what how much of your context window you've used, and that becomes really important because your context window is all of that is getting passed back to the LLM with every request. And so if you're paying on a token basis, it can get very expensive very quickly. And so it's important to pay attention to your context window in terms of it being able to continue to understand the task and move forward with it, and also your cost controls.
So if we take a look now, okay, so things have changed around. We have no more raw HTML. But we lost our sticky footer. I'm not going to, since that is not the focus of this, I'm not going to sweat it. We can go back and start talking to our tool again to re-enable the sticky footer. But because that's an aside, I'm not going to bother with that. What I will bother with, though, is moving on to the next step of this demo. What we want to do ultimately is create a web form a web interface for users to enter this information, to provide this information. So I'm going to tell Cursor now to add a second page based on, and I'm going to give it the URL of the actual form, and then some additional instructions here. I want to make sure that all the data elements are included. Mirror that, I'm going to ask it to mirror that layout as similarly, I guess, as possible to the PDF. This is a complex PDF, and under the hood, there's not much structure, so there's not a whole lot for the tooling to go on. Some of those fields, a number of them are required fields for a form to be submitted, and I'm going to indicate that I want those indicated back to the user using a red bold asterisk. And as a stretch goal, so to speak, so I don't have to fill out the form, I'm going to ask it to generate the test data so that the form is filled out automatically so that we can see this all in play.
And Jeff, while that's going on, a couple of questions have popped up while you're concentrating on this. Chris, if I could kind of toss to you, Diane asks, if devs are just using vibe coding now to reduce tedious, sometimes easier work, how does this impact the fundamental skill development, specifically for junior developers? So, Chris, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that, and I think it goes to a fundamental concern around this doesn't matter. And I'm begging the question a little bit there, but if the application works, does it, and it meets the user requirements, does it matter whether you used code gen or you knew what you were doing? And as a senior developer who's been coding for a long time, I'm going to say, yes, of course it matters. But to the person that just coded $1 million application, you know, $1 million a month game, vibe coding it, did it matter to them? And so I think it really becomes important to understand, yes, you need to know code fundamentals because you need to be able to understand problems and fix them and create good architectures, but that will become less and less important. And what will become more important is our ability to prompt and leverage these tools iteratively and for ideation and architecture development, and the code becomes boilerplate. It becomes less important, and it becomes more important to be able to use this tool. It's the same with the paint sprayer. It's not as important to understand how a roller works if I can just spray it. And so that's not to say that it's not important, but I think just reading the tea leaves that it's going to become less of a focus about code skills and more of a focus about architecture, specification, and prompting skills.
Great, thank you, Chris. I'll hand it back to you, Jeff. And Jeff, just so you know, we're at the halfway point right now.
Great, thanks for the reminder. We're just about done with this initial portion. We're going to take what we're doing here after we look at the result and kind of grow it up a little bit. And at that point, it'll take a little bit longer to run. So, and that's where we'll continue conversation as this runs in the background. So this is done now. We can see that again, the overall summary of work that's been done has been presented to us. And so I'm going to toggle back over now, to the form and go ahead and refresh this.
And as he's doing it, I just want to say, we don't endorse any particular tools. Cursor's good, ChatGPT is good for what we do, but there's Kiro, there's GitHub Copilot, there's a bunch of these. And so it's really going to be dependent on your business and your stack.
All right, so I've added, so a new page has been added. And you can see that now we have the form data elements rendering and populated with the test data that I've asked it to generate. I have the red bold required field indicators in place. This is a fairly static kind of rendering. in that I can't add other rows here. We're going to try and address that as we move forward. But nonetheless, I mean, it's doing what I've asked. And you can see all the different parts of the form have been implemented. And I wonder, so if let's just see if the validation is working.
This is, you know, this is really remarkable that it was able to develop this in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, right? And so the bar is set already with just doing this kind of vibe codey type of approach. But obviously, and I don't want to steal Jeff's thunder here, but you'll see that the application architecture itself, it's a monolith. It doesn't have good project structure, and obviously he showed some things where it's not entirely working. And so that's kind of a challenge. And going back to that question, if you don't understand architecture, if you don't understand code structure, this probably looks okay, but it's probably not scalable. It's probably not maintainable. And there's a great deal of stuff that, because it wasn't prompted that way, it doesn't care about that.
It doesn't care, and it doesn't address it. That's exactly right. But what it does do is, let's see here, gives me 400 lines of Python that, including some, let's see here. Well, let's see what did it right. We've got different sections to render different portions of the page, but it's not very modular, not modular at all. It is a monolith, but it's allowed me to explore a piece of capability, technology that I would not have been able to access otherwise. In a few minutes here, we have an operational form, great prototyping, but not so enterprise ready. But regardless, couldn't have done it faster, even if I knew Python. That's for sure. I assume so. Anyway, I don't know. I don't think Python capabilities, but this is more tooling than language specific. Now, this is all well and good, but it's not really where we want it to be. So it certainly doesn't address spec-driven development that was the concept of which was introduced earlier. So we're going to take all this and just throw it away. It doesn't matter, right? Because the tooling generates it for us. So if I'd written those 400 lines and gone through this, I wouldn't be so apt at all to just clear my chats. I'm going to switch back over and take the files that were generated and just toss them. I wouldn't want to go do that at all. This is the investment that I was talking about as a developer that occurs as the course of developing proceeds. You become more and more invested in the thing that you're working on, and you become, as a result, more rigid in change to that. And certainly you resist the ability to simply delete it and start over. But that's okay, because we can do that. And we can do that. What I'm going to do here is use ChatGPT to harness a capability of AI that is that we all know to be really a strength, and it's a strong arrow in its quiver. And that is, I'm going to take the same specifications that or requirements, desires, statements that I asked it Cursor to use before, and instead of just asking for a solution to address those, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to create product specifications for all those things that I've asked Cursor to do. And because AI is good at writing prompts for itself, you can see the result is significantly better than anything that resulted from me as a developer just asking Cursor to address. And that's because I've asked it for product specs. Now I've got purpose statements, I've got page and navigation specifications, visual layout requirements, specific calculation definitions that ChatGPT was able to determine from accessing the PDF. All of this was not in place before. All of the different form sections are addressed, the data types, more on the calculations. Here we go with the test data. Now, what I could do, and so on and so forth. Important here. So this generation of the spec, is defining acceptance criteria. Awesome. None of this came about before. So I could take all of this, simply copy it, and paste it into Cursor. But what I'm going to choose to do instead is use a previously generated version of this, because that was done by ChatGPT, but it includes more of an information architecture, specifying the form files, and how those coding assets should be laid out. And I'm just going to take all this.
And as an aside, while he's doing that, everybody who's a developer, really, I think everybody should just get comfortable with Markdown. That it's the language that ChatGPT uses. Most LLMs respond well to it, and it has become the sort of the right Markdown, or sort of formatting and text structure, because it's readable regardless of whether it's rendered. And so I would just suggest get comfortable with it, because once you do, it's revolutionary.
Okay, so I've pasted this into Cursor, same directory, it's empty, and I'm just going to let this spin on it for a while. This will take a few minutes, so we'll branch off here in a second to resume conversation as this works in the background, and then come back and revisit the product at the end. You can see.
Sorry, I was just going to say I'd like to share something while this is running, but go finish up what you were going to say.
I was just going to point out the more robust to-do list. We're up to 14 tasks, task specific for each section in the form, and we're including this all in one shot of a prompt, rather than the conversation that I was having before, because it's going to create a more robust product, something that we can bring back into a team, and as a result, although it's more of a one shot and less conversational here in the beginning, the same conversation can apply afterwards. And most likely we'll have an error or two that we'll need to address, and we can have that discourse back and forth between the developer and AI to get the end product in a more desirable state. So Chris, I think maybe at this point, it's a good time to switch over and just let this spin in the background.
Yeah, so I'm going to share real quickly here. So this, and again, I'm not endorsing any particular technology, but this is Kiro. And what's interesting about Kiro is that it's explicitly spec driven. And so if you want to, start a chat, it gives you options to either vibe, which is chat first or build, or spec. And if you tell it to spec, it will create a plan. And so this is something I vibe coded a while ago. And so I started with telling it what I wanted. It creates a requirements document. And again, here we're looking at Markdown. We can do a quick preview of it, right? So we've got requirements. I didn't write any of this, it wrote it. And then from when you're happy with the requirements, it will generate a design document. And that, is sort of similar to what Jeff showed using ChatGPT, right? It's specifying how it's going to be built and what it's going to do, et cetera. And then when you're happy with that, it will create a task list. And this is what I think is brilliant, because what Jeff was talking about, a one shot, you got to paste all of that into your context window, and you hope that it gets it right. And if it loses context, it sort of falls apart and fails. And that's one of the risks about just taking a spec like that and just pasting it in. Whereas something like this, you can see here, it's created a series of tasks. And this is, again, markdown, right? And it's just checkboxes to say whether the task has been completed or not. And you can see here, it's actually recognizing that this task didn't complete correctly. And this is some UI sugar that Kiro has to say, here, retry, and it will kick it over into your request window. But what's really nice about this is that you can get really granular and really specific about each task and what you want it to do. And you can say, okay, today I'm just working on task 4, right? And I can get that to be really clear, and I can just run each task, and then I can view the changes that happened. I can see what it executed. And this becomes really important because AI will tend to want to do more than you ask it to, and it doesn't always understand things. And again, when you're doing multi-shot development, every time is a new context, and so it doesn't remember anything from the past. And so I've had it where it's created redundant functionality, duplicate functionality, things where it's really hard to sort of extricate the code that it introduced. And so it becomes really important to narrow scope and then pick a task, execute it, and then review what it built. And I will say too, more important sometimes than what it built is what it didn't build. Because sometimes you brought some assumptions to the table and it didn't get those assumptions, and so it doesn't implement something the way you wanted. Sometimes it just gets lazy and it will build a file with nothing in it and say, yeah, I did that. Sometimes it will create tests that fail and then fix the test instead of the code. Right. And so there's all kinds of things where it becomes, if you one-shot things, there's higher risk. And from a pro dev story perspective, it's going to be always better to do something where you're narrowly scoping your tasking. So I just wanted to share that. And again, I'm not necessarily endorsing Kiro. I think you can do very similar things with Cursor. And sometimes what I'll do is I will have, I like Cursor a lot. And so I will have Cursor look at my code base and I'll tell it, create a task list for how you would implement this. And then I look at that task list and I say, okay, that's not deep enough. That's not correct. And I just iterate. And I'm having a conversation with my code where it's helping to create a roadmap of the things that need to happen. And that's incredibly powerful for being able to, go from a prototype to something that's really, complex and production ready.
I know we're not supposed to be endorsing technologies here, but I'm glad you showed Kiro. That is, so from what I've seen, as Chris has shared some of this with me in the past, the capabilities there are significant, and it's really enticing what it's doing, and the way they went about implementing that to-do list, that task list, especially with the retry built in. It's sugar, but it's handy to go re-execute a portion of the bigger picture.
And I think, if your stuff is still building here, a bit of a tangent there. Every one of these systems has a different sort of billing approach. And so Cursor is, it's token based essentially, right? And so when you pay at a certain level, it says you're going to get up to at least $20 worth of inference based on token cost. And they will try to give you more as they can. And they'll tell you, well, you actually spent $30, but you only paid 20. But it's really easy to burn through those tokens. And so for Cursor, their fallback is, instead of choosing a specific model, like I really like Claude Sonnet 4, but it's expensive. And so I can choose auto, and I don't pay for the tokens if I use auto because they're just routing to whatever model is free. The problem with that is you get inconsistent AI generation, which can be problematic. On the other hand, Kiro is based on requests. And so a vibe request or a spec request, you get for $20 or $40 or $200 a month, you get X number of these requests. The problem is it's hard to really define what a request is. And sometimes you end up burning through these sort of valuable requests on small problems. And so you might actually think about using Kiro and Cursor, or maybe you want to introduce Claude Code, which is very CLI driven for bigger projects. You might like have a bunch of these running. And so I think it's just important to understand how they get built, because there's nothing worse than getting really, really deep into something and then it suddenly says, oh, you ran out of your quota. Come back next month. And it's like, okay, well, I guess I'm done for the month. And it can be a risk. I will say, I don't see a scenario for pro dev on any of these tools that costs less than $200 a month. They try to make it attractive at 20 and 60 and whatever, but if you're using this every day for 4 or 5 hours a day, you're going to burn through anything that's less than the Ultra. And even that is, questionable. But I'll say this, I mean, $2,400 a year to have a coding assistant like this that you can use every day is, I mean, you can't beat that. You can't find an intern for that, for God's sake. So, it's well worth it, but you just have to adjust your expectations and manage that cost.
Okay, so this is done now. If you want to switch over and see this, or keep chatting.
Let's go for it.
Okay.
And Jeff, you have about 5 or 6 minutes left.
This is done. This is has all been generated. And if we look,
are you sharing?
Here, yes.
Are you sharing?
Yes.
Oh. You are not.
You're not. There we go.
Is that it? Thanks. So this is all done. And you can see we have a far more robust form that's come out of this this is what I was talking about earlier, the ability to dynamically, specify these ranges of values or rows of values. The calculations are in place. My test data is filled out. Hey, my sticky footer is back. And so, it's not the exact replica of the PDF form, but it ran for about a total of 5 minutes, maybe 6. That's not bad, guys. And as a result, you can see the same files. We have an orchestration .py file, but then the different elements have been broken out into the modules according to that information architecture that was specified in the spec. And so we have a far more modular approach that can be pulled out in piecemeal and plugged into other solutions. So that was the gist of the demo that we have prepared for today. I hope that the benefit can be seen. Is it ticked and tied code? Is it really efficient? That's for further iterations. For 5 minutes, I've got a good deal of collateral that's been generated for me. It's not too bad.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I mean, it's amazing that in this amount of time we can build something like this. And so, it's the way we're going to do development moving forward. Where we're at sort of industry wide is developing the right protocols and practices and disciplines for this. And that becomes, it's evolving, but it's an important conversation to have. But there's no question. I can't justify, no, I'm going to spend a week building this form when I could have spent, 2 hours doing it. And the asterisk there is, I'm going to spend 2 hours building it, and then I'm going to spend 8 hours fixing it, because that's just been my experience with AI code gen, is it goes wrong. But if you think about it as, I'm going to spend 4 hours speccing it, I'm going to spend an hour running it, and I'm going to spend 4 hours reviewing it and resolving it and fixing it and iterating over it, that's still much less than a week. And I'm just, making up numbers, but that's not unrealistic. And so I think it's important to recognize that adding more process is still a net positive, because you're doing it so much quicker than you could manually. And that's not to say that everything should be done by AI. There are parts of code that you just need to get your hands dirty and get in there and do it right. But AI gets you 90% of the way there, or 80% of the way there, and focus that 20% on the things that really matter. And what's nice about this is it does give us the opportunity to all sort of become architects, right? I mean, you have to start thinking architecturally. And so instead of just building out a feature, you got to be thinking about the scope of it and what your audience is and how you're using it and how maintainable it needs to be and all these things, because that's important for how to get it to generate code right. So I'll just share here just a couple of, we'll call them sort of wrap up things here, and we don't have a ton of time, but moving on from here, we didn't get to Jeff's live demo slide, but why does this matter? Well, vibe coding matters because it encourages creativity and exploration, intuitive development. This whole thing is about developing modern discipline with modern tools, learning how to use a paint sprayer, learning how to mask for painting, which is very different from masking from rolling, right? So we're developing modern disciplines and finding ways to still have good traceability, accountability, and code quality, but at a much higher velocity. And so some success strategies for vibe coding, and I won't read these word for word, but limit your process overhead. If you're doing vibe coding, just stay in flow, get it done, build something, and make it fun and enjoyable. Explore tech, investigate new platforms, try something you've never done before. You can be creative and lean into intuition and aesthetic and flow. Go fast and break things, right? Just delete it because it wasn't right. And I think, within a frame, right? So put a stake in the ground and say, I'm going to spend today doing some vibe coding to iterate over things and see what I like. But you don't need to gold plate, right? Focus on what you need today, not for the future. Iterate, try new things, and then have that conversation with your code to understand fit and gap, to understand what the code's doing, finding consistencies and opportunities. And then for structured AI dev, your success strategies. So leveraging multiple tools. I almost always use ChatGPT to develop my architecture and to ideate. It's frankly cheaper. And I find ChatGPT to be really good at that. So you might use ChatGPT for that, or whatever, Copilot, whatever you like. And then you might use Copilot, GitHub Copilot or Cursor for smaller tasks, and Kiro for spec, or you might use Claude Code to do, big chunked work as sort of agentic workflow. But find a multiple, sort of a combination of tools, and you'll be better. Spec-driven development all day. Develop detailed specifications, design docs, task lists. You saw, I didn't give you a ton of time to look at it, but that produced really high quality code. I would consider it to be almost production ready. And I vibe coded that thing. It probably took me 20 hours and I didn't demo it. But point is, it was that good because I developed detailed specs. Narrowly scope your tasks, one task per prompt, or if you're using spec-driven development, those tasks should be really, really narrowly scoped. Be very clear about your instructions, because it always wants to do more. It always wants to be helpful. And so it'll do things like, oh, I fixed this other problem, which wasn't actually a problem. And now you have to go walk it back. Choosing the right model is important. So you might choose a smaller, less costly model for small tasks. Whenever I need something done big, I tend to lean towards Claude Sonnet 4. I think it's one of the best ones out there right now, but there are other ones that are good too. But think about what model you're using for the task. Pay attention to your context window. Many smaller chats versus longer chats might be good, but it depends on, that's true for Cursor. It's not necessarily true for Kiro. So understand how your context window functions against cost, and also how it functions against what you can do with a given prompt. Because if you run out of context window, it will lose context and it has to go, hey, I gotta tell me what we were talking about. And it's really frustrating to try to summarize a 200K context window to start over. Clear and thorough prompts, more detail. This is true no matter what, but more detail, more guardrails, remove ambiguity, just be really clear. And I think about it as some of you probably seen the peanut butter sandwich thing where somebody tries to tell somebody how to make a peanut butter sandwich and the other person takes them very literally, right? And that's what you're dealing with here. And it will do what you tell it to do. And whatever assumptions you're bringing to the table, you have to make them explicit. And then lastly, I would say, double check everything. Review everything it did, see if it did it right, see where it went sideways. It's always going to go sideways on something. And more importantly than what it did is what it didn't do. And that's important because you want to make sure that it didn't do things you didn't want it to do, and it did do everything you asked it to do. But these are, again, this is about developing that discipline. And then I'll just kind of wrap up here. I know we're close to time. Closing thoughts, vibe coding versus structured AI dev is not an either or, it's a both. Pick them up, learn them, learn when to use them and how to use them. I won't read through all of these, but a couple of them: detail, clarity, and specificity matter. Learn how to develop a new AI-centric development discipline. And lastly, I think this is probably the most important, particularly for a pro dev story, is spend more time developing the spec docs and reviewing output than you actually spend executing the code gen. It's a shift. This is new, but that shift is really important because the more time you put up front and the more time you put in afterwards, the better quality you're going to get. All right, I think we'll probably have a brief window for Q&A. Is that true?
That's true. A couple of minutes here. Along the lines of your closing thoughts, one person asked, how can organizations effectively onboard new or more traditional developers to a vibe coding paradigm? So what are your thoughts there in terms of like bringing on new resources into the organization in this mode?
I think it depends on your institutional discipline. You have to create that process and create those standards, and you could clearly communicate the expectations. This is the way we do it. This is how we do it. But I think if you're talking about overcoming the resistance of senior developers who are like, I don't need that, that's important, and it's a difficult thing to do. I think that I have found that spec-driven development is really well aligned with how I want to develop if I'm doing it by hand anyway. So I think leaning more into that higher structure, more effort around the spec and everything is helping to bring that forward. But again, if you have a wide open free for all and say just use whatever AI tool and be faster, you're not going to get employee satisfaction and you're not going to get good quality. So developing a structure is important.
Okay. And Jeff, I'm going to toss this one to you as you're coming up the learning curve. Somebody asked, what new skill sets or training programs should organizations consider for their engineering teams to effectively leverage vibe coding?
The skill sets that I continually lean on. I think it's almost obvious, but it bears repeating. Prompting, knowing how to talk effectively with a set of tools sounds even almost esoteric, but it's real and incredibly valuable. So understanding the different types of prompting, how to employ one type over another, use different approaches to get at end results that are desirable is the way to go. Also, don't forget that AI is good at kind of specifying what AI needs to do AI's job. So it's kind of meta, it's very meta, but using, if you're unclear on the prompts that work well or will give you the most benefit, ask AI to write the prompt.
I think I'll just tag on something, and it may not be a programming or like a program of study, but as a discipline, there's this concept of rule sets or guiding principles. And so what you can do is create some documents, and probably in Markdown, that specify how you want your agent to execute code. And that goes along with it. Saves you a lot of that prompting work because it's already in these rule documents. And So that becomes, I think, really important. You can create one for your project that specifies this is what the project's for. These are the tools we use. This is how things should be implemented. And you can get really granular and say, this is the type of code we want. We want camel case naming, et cetera, right? Developing those types of processes and expecting that as a deliverable of your AI code gen process is, I think, an important skill that you can develop.
Great. Okay, we're about at time. Everyone, I really appreciate your attendance. Jeff and Chris, great job. For future purposes, just so you know, our next 2 webinars in our ongoing series are going to be making your data ready for AI. And the next one after that is making your data available to AI. So really looking at doing some practical work with your data and preparing the organization for your AI initiatives. Thanks everyone for your time, and look forward to seeing you on the next webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.